Okay, people, so today's session is going to be about using the assignment activity in Moodle. So this is an activity that you would use to collect a work from your students electronically. So it might be project work, homeworks, assignments, anything like that. They can submit those files through, you can take a look at them, and then you can grade, give feedback, etc., things like that. Today's session is just going to have a little look at how you would set up this assignment. In the next session, next week, we'll look at how you actually grade the work, but we're just going to focus on setting it up today, just to break it down to nice chunks. So we can see here at the moment, I've got my demo assignment 1 here, so this is the kind of icon, I've got that hand with a document in there, so that's what it looks like once you've got an assignment set up. If I click in here, so you can see this information there. That's where your summary would go, where it says demo assignment 1 underneath that, and all that there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my course and I'm going to set up a new assignment. So first thing, as always, I'm going to turn my editing on, and then I'm going to go to the end of my section 3 and click add an activity or resource. And assignment is right up at the top here, it's the very first one, so I need to click on it, and then I need to hit add at the bottom of the screen. So the only thing you have to put in is an assignment name. So I'm going to call mine demo assignment 2, so something really imaginative. Usually it's a good idea to have a description as well for your students. So this assignment is for your human body homework. So something there that students can understand about what they should be submitting. You've got an option underneath to tick here to say whether you want that description on the course page. Obviously, the more you put on that course page, it kind of takes up space. You might want to leave it in the assignment itself, but that's an option if you want to take that. Other thing to notice is you'll see these little question marks as you go down. Do click on them if you're not sure, because they give you a nice description of a lot of the features here. So if you're not sure what does that feature mean, hit the question mark to get some information. So you can also put in additional files. This is quite nice actually. If you've got a piece of work where you want to give the students out a template or a sheet you want them to fill in, you can drop that in here. They'll see that when they go on the assignment and they can download it, complete it, and then send it back to you. First bit you'll see in terms of sections is this availability section. This is probably the most important. It trips the most people up. First thing you have to have is a date where you allow submissions from. Usually people want that immediately, so what we'll see is that I've actually got today's date in there, and it's saying that it's going to allow submissions from today. I've got my date, my year, and I can set a time. So maybe I say that I want to allow submissions from 5 o'clock today. After that, you've got a due date, which is the limit, obviously, for students to get their work in. This is when they need to have it in. And then you can have a cut-off date. Now, cut-off date and due date are separate because you can allow students to submit beyond the due date. So if you don't set a cut-off date, even as it goes past the due date, all your students in that course will still be able to keep submitting. If you don't want to allow that, you can enable the cut-off date. I generally leave that because often you'll find that students will have some reason, or things like that, where they might need to submit beyond that due date, and you might want to negotiate that with them. You can pick a cut-off date though, and what you're allowed to do beyond that is enable extensions for students, which we'll go into in next week's lesson. But generally, I leave that off. So there's my due date set, there's my submission in. As I scroll down, I've got what kind of files do I want to submit. I can leave all of this. The only thing that needs to be ticked is file submissions to allow them to put in file. I've got some other things here. The Moodle one allows them to put in things like audio recordings and stuff like that, but generally we leave that and just hit that file submissions. If we scroll on down, back down to our feedback types, we can leave that one. The settings in there, you don't need to put anything in there, you can leave all those settings, so we can leave that one alone. When it gets to submission settings, you've got some things here. I generally again leave these settings as they are. But if you wanted to, what you could do is you could require that students have to click the submit button. What this means is essentially they've kind of got like a draft experience where they can put a file up and then come back to it later. But what I would do is I would generally just leave all that stuff there. So I'll close that one down. Group submission settings, you can leave this one as well. Don't get confused if you've got groups set up in your Moodle course. This isn't to do with groups for the course. This is if you wanted to have an assignment that you gave out to a group of students, say, and they would submit one piece of work for 4 of them or something. So unless you're doing that, you can ignore those settings. In your notification settings, this one's up to you. Do you want to be notified about every submission that goes in? It's up to you. Perhaps you want to be reminded for everyone just to kind of check, keep a track of your students, who submitted, who hasn't. Or if you're happy and you're confident that by the closing date they'll all be in, you can leave that as no. Again, the same thing for late submissions if you want a notification for that. And then last of all, for notifying students. So this notifies students that they have this assignment up and the due date, things like that. It's generally best to leave that on yes, just to keep them informed. After that, we've got our grades section. By default, it's set to points, so you can give them a score as a number. There's a maximum point setting here. There is an option here for scales, so if you have a particular scale you use, for example, I know that in BTEC courses they have a scale of pass, merit, distinction, and there's also options for fail or late submission in here. So you can set up a scale. If you've got a particular scale that you want to use that isn't in this list, then that's another session we'll talk about. You set that up in your course administration settings under grades and scales, so you can set up your own scales in there. For this one, I'm just going to leave it on points for there. As far as grading method is, you want to leave that as simple direct grading. There are other options like rubrics and things like that, but generally I'm going to leave it on that one. We'll leave rubrics to another session. You can set a grade to pass if you want to have a pass-fail mark for that. But it's not mandatory. And then I usually leave all this kind of stuff about blind marking and everything, just leave that all on no. Down in common module settings, the only thing that I set in here usually is that I set that I might want to have my assignment might need to be hidden until I'm ready to show it to students, or if I want to change it later. The other thing to put down is about group mode. So if you have got groups in your Moodle group, perhaps you've got a couple of different groups doing the same Moodle course, you probably want to put them into either separate groups where they can't see what's going on in other groups, or you might want visible groups where people can see what's going on in terms of other groups, who submitted, stuff like that. The only other thing down here is restrict access. You could put down special rules about when people can see this, who can see it, but usually having the allow students to submit from date and cut-off date, etc. is enough for that. So I'm finished on this one. I'm going to save and display, and I can see here I've got my demo assignment 2. I've got a little description, my summary which says how many participants there are, how many submitted, etc., all that information, and that's all that I need to see at the moment. Next week we'll have a look at viewing and grading your submissions. Hopefully that was useful for this week and is enough to get you started on collecting work from your students in assignments. Only other thing I'll say just quickly here is that this is slightly different from Turnitin. If you use this compared to Turnitin, the advantages are you can have any type of file, so they can submit publisher files or mind maps or anything, whereas Turnitin can only do Word and PDF files. The disadvantage is that obviously you're not going to kind of get that same feedback mechanism where you can click on to make comments, and there'll be no plagiarism checking. But there's pros and cons to each, so you just have to decide which one works best for you. Okay, thanks very much. Hope this was useful, and I'll catch you for next week's session.